Welcome to the J29 Podcast, hosting conversations with American pastors about how they engage politics and culture in their preaching, discipleship, and mentoring. For more information on the J29 Coalition, visit j29coalition.com.
Andy and Jackie, we are acquainted.
Mm-hmm.
Some might even say we have a friendship. We all know each other. We're serving in Arizona, but we're serving in very different contexts. So first of all, who are you and what's the context you're serving in? Jackie, you go first.
So I am a church planter. I planted a church in 2021 out of an existing homeless ministry. So that's kind of central to our life and community. It's central to our culture, to our priorities as a community, and really shapes the way we exist in our place. We are a community that is caring for the poor and learning how to live life with and to create a community of belonging that is safe and trauma-informed.
What is there a certain tradition you're part of?
Yeah, so I am ordained in ECO, which is the Evangelical Covenant Order of Presbyterians.
Cool. Got it. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, I'm in Tucson, Arizona, a church called Mission Church, and I planted a church in 2014, and then we merged a couple years later with another small church, and that is what is now Mission. And we started out thinking about two groups of people. One were what I would probably call your classic midtown Tucson person, which is a little hard to define, but they're generally not going to be in church, generally post-Christian, generally very artistic, generally well-educated, but not well-funded. There are a lot of descriptors, but we were thinking about that demographic and people who had experienced faith tradition that they'd walked away from. So we were thinking about those two groups of people when we really founded the church. So that's our context. We're near the university in central Tucson, but we're not a university-oriented church per se. We're focused on that specific demographic in Tucson.
And are you part of a particular tradition?
So we actually, that's an interesting question for us. We are part of the Christian Reformed Church in North America, but we actually started unaffiliated. So in a way, we joined the denomination about 4 years ago through relationships and a sense of needing to have, co-laborers and accountability. But our church was formed more by those neighbors and friends who started it, so that it doesn't look like your classic Christian Reformed church.
Yeah. Now, for those of us watching on video, we might notice that it looks like you're in some sort of European hostel. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Beds and many books and.
Yeah. I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's actually a museum that is representing a European hostel in Mike Goheen's grandchildren's bedroom.
Okay.
And Mike Goheen being a professor that we would all be familiar with. So I'm at his house. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And you're part of something called the Missional Training Center that meets out of his house. Okay, so that makes some sense.
I just got done with class in the living room, and then I migrated back here to his office / grandchildren's bedroom, and I have a painting of him staring at me, so I feel a lot of accountability.
No. Andy, that's amazing.
Wait a minute. Mike Goheen has a painting of his own self in his grandkids' bedroom?
Yes.
Can we...
That feels appropriate to the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, this is perfect. Hey, Mike. Good to have you on the show.
Amazing. Goodness gracious.
Oh, I know exactly what I'm getting my kids for Christmas this year.
Totally. Same.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get one of those
watercolor painting of yourself, right?
Yeah, I have to find some of those Midtown Tucson artists to help me out because we don't have any artists in North Phoenix. So, okay, so we've all been thinking about how to pastor well in our very different contexts. What, as you're thinking about, here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, and there's all sorts of stuff hitting the news, radio, YouTube, social media, and the people that we're pastoring are picking up on some of this stuff. A lot of it's, toxic rage, tribalism, a lot of it's centered around kind of the broad term of politics. How are you thinking about addressing politics, culture war stuff in preaching and teaching?
Andy, you go first.
All right. It's interesting because Caleb, you and I did kind of the inaugural J29 cohort. I was part of that. And one of the things that I heard there was maybe not to make politics the central piece of like your worship services, or maybe to have those conversations on the side. And I actually had to struggle with that because I had been bringing it in to the worship service a lot, but in a unique way. And I think the way I would say that is we did a series kind of seeing that the election was coming on just kind of some Christian foundational principles around politics, which I've defined as loosely like living within a city together and applying the law of loving your neighbor within that context. And so then we taught on it specifically, and part of this is just the material we're in. We were coming out of the book of Mark, going into the book of Acts. We should have done Luke, I know, but we didn't. We did Mark, and then we did Acts. But I've been naming, for 2 years, the political question in the mind of the original audience, and asking questions, doing a little dialogue in the service with people, saying, now, if you are in a culture where Caesar is Lord, and you hear this, this is unsettling, and this doesn't work in the synagogue. This doesn't work, in Caesar's court. This is disruptive. What would you do? So I feel like I've been peppering it in. That comes from, I think, learning from experiencing 2016 and 2020, and thinking those years I was trying to address things with individuals on the fly instead of making this a consistent conversation that we were having. So not to go against what I learned at J29, but I thought, I think we need to be regularly asking the question in our community, what is the political meaning of this? Not just in the trying moment. Maybe normalizing that conversation. And I believe we've gotten better at engaging through doing that. That'd be part of my answer. Yeah.
So am I understand you right, that as part of your preaching, you're inviting people to imagine being the original hearer of the Gospel of Mark, or the original audience, and then imagining what are the political implications that they're thinking about living under Roman rule. And then are you expecting them to connect the dots to living in the American empire?
So, right. No, yes and no to some degree. And that is, I think, where I'd love to hear even your pushback on this, but I've been a little more careful not to say that equals this in our day exactly. And I just think that is an exegetical mistake to say like this thing they faced is exactly this. I think the left and right, personally, both can make that mistake. But But I also don't want to leave them thinking that I don't believe this has real implication. I do as a pastor. So I've been trying to do one of two things. Either say, I'll just stop and say, is this at all unsettling you in our moment? Are you seeing any connections? You should, but I'll just kind of leave it.
Yeah.
Or I'll do, there are other times where I've said, just like this didn't fit well into the tribes of their day, this is going to challenge the tribes of our day. So if you're feeling more inclined toward this, you should feel some discomfort. If you're more inclined this way, you should feel some discomfort. The kingdom of God is not fitting well. It's its own thing. It's coming from God. It's not going to sort. So I've named things like that, but I've been a little careful to not say particular issue on the ballot equals what we just saw in the book of Acts right there.
I think that's good, Andy. It reminds me of when Eugene Peterson says, "Tell it slant."
Yeah.
Because I think it can be easy as pastors to want to give people the answers, to draw the hard line down the middle. And I think that it like stifles the spirit at work in people's minds and imaginations. And what we really want is them to be attuned to learn to listen to the spirit, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from creating that tension where they're starting to wrestle with it themselves. And that creates the space for the spirit to work in them and to start connecting the dots, exactly like you're saying. But it's really hard to do that because I don't know about you guys, but I just want to be like, hey, this is the answer to the question that you're asking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And I want people to really listen to the spirit, but I also want them to come to new conclusions because of what the spirit and the text are teaching.
Right. Yeah.
And, I think, Caleb, your book speaks to this. Just stating an argument that's jarring to a person rarely gets them there. Right. Yeah. And so I think that's my learning curve, is trying to bring some really meaningful stuff to them to let them chew on and really trust that the spirit's at work and that the word is powerful. And that's hard for me because I want to think I need to, I need to interpret it all for you.
Yeah.
But hey, I could be wrong. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jackie, I love what you're saying about, we don't want to stifle their being sensitive to the spirit or even their own creativity and making discerning decisions. How do you foster that kind of environment in your preaching and teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been trying to name the emotions of living in the tension and almost giving people permission to be like, hey, you don't need to solve it. This is just what it means to be exiles, to be resident aliens, right? Like, we oftentimes want to we want that solution, or we want that, we want someone to give us the right answer, because then then all seems right in the world until it doesn't seem right in the world anymore. And so we actually spent the fall going through the Exodus story and the people in the wilderness. And so just being able to name, through those stories of learning to trust God, learning to be present to what he's doing, I think those are the ways in which, in many other ways, just the subversive nature of teaching and preaching, right? This Easter, we finished our series on the Lord's Prayer, and I finished it with, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever." And so kind of this clash of kingdoms. And what does it mean to really hope and believe and trust that the kingdom of God is true and real and already and not yet because of the resurrection? And how does that contrast with the world in which we live, and kind of what Andy was saying, like letting people put those pieces together. I'm thinking about it more so now as we're moving into a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount. So how do we say it without saying it, right? How do we put forth, because really what we're putting forth is Jesus. I want people to not just have like a way of life because it's a good way to live, but I want them to be enthralled and captivated by Jesus. In the hopes that, in the desire that would bring about transformation in their lives, and they would be able to start to see those things. You know, I wasn't pastoring in 2016, so this is all new for me. You guys both had to live through that. But we ended up through our church plant absorbing an older congregation. So we have like a group of people that are in their 70s to 90s, and so have lived through this Christendom. Like there is no imagination for America not being a Christian nation and all the things that come along with that. And then I have people that are not like that, right? Young families and so we've also really tried, this isn't necessarily teaching and preaching, except it is in a lot of ways, is almost like mission, like being a missional community as almost a distraction in a good way.
Say more about that.
Like having a central mission that we're all connected to, that we're all caring for, working alongside one another. That's brought about a lot of like family and community that doesn't end up being tribal. It's about what Jesus has called us to do and who he's called us to be. And I feel like that has helped. It's helped just lessen the amount of stress and anxiety that people are feeling around all sorts of things, because it's like, oh, well, we may have disagreements about this, but we come together on Mondays and we both are caring for Patrick, right? Like these are people that we love with real names. And so I feel like in a healthy way, like mission has become almost like a prophetic distraction for us as a community.
Yeah. It's also, I think, a way to be civically engaged at the local level, right? I mean, instead of focusing so much energy at who's getting elected and the proposition in Washington, it's like our neighbor is here.
Yeah. And I've hoped that even that, right, it's not just the preaching, it's the word and deed. So the deed we have a man that's 82. He's probably the most, he definitely voted a certain way. He definitely knocked on doors for a certain person. But he shows up every single Monday. He is the most faithful. And I've just had to trust, like, that he is able to put those pieces together himself, right? It's not my responsibility. But as you're serving and loving the poor and being with, I hope that it's transforming him, right? It's a way of being in the world that I'm hoping is discipling him and making him rethink maybe some of the ways that he thinks about immigrants and the poor and the policies that are going along with that. So, yeah. I don't know if it's working, but it's a big experiment, right?
And then there's the question of what does it mean for it to work, right? Like that's
a great point.
Is that everybody ends up. For me, it would be that people end up with the same views that I have, or that people commune more with Jesus. And I would hope that would lead to some change, and I hope I'm onto something. And I don't want to say what I intuit or think is meaningless. It's not, but that's something I have to be careful with. Is arrival for them doesn't need to mean you and I align. It means you're moving toward Jesus too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great point.
So, thinking about your people, the congregation that you serve, it seems like there's going to be differing opinions between them, and some of this stuff might come up at the potluck or the Sunday school class or the service project. How are you helping to pastor them as they think about sharing communion with someone with whom they fundamentally disagree about politics?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've found most helpful, and I think I've started to hear people refer to it, so it's making me think that it's sticking, is simply imagining, and this was easy for us going through the book of Mark, I guess, but I've tried to express, imagine what it was like to be the disciples following Jesus. Let's put our our imagination hat on here, and this group of people who we look back at and we say they're our founders of our New Testament faith, they did not come into this endeavor thinking the same, assuming the same things, liking each other, relating to each other. So I've tried to define the church a little differently. I think sometimes some of our language around like finding community has actually led us astray in this, because I think what I mean is, like, by finding community, we often mean like finding a place where I'm super like seen and heard and comfortable. And I don't know that the disciples felt that way with each other. I mean, it sure seems like, James and John wanted to be the greatest, and Peter was getting rebuked, and they found an opportunity to angle themselves in there. And that, if you're looking for like a beautiful experience of community, that may not have felt like it for them in that moment. Or, when Matthew, the tax collector, don't you wish that like The Chosen was real and we knew what their conversations were like? We don't. But I have told our church, like, you can intuit from their backgrounds that the only thing holding them together is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And a belief that he is their Messiah. And by the way, they don't even understand or agree on what that means yet.
That's right. Yeah. Huh.
But they're convinced that his words are powerful and who he is special. And if they didn't have Jesus, they would not be together. That, I think, should be true of our churches. If we would be a church without Jesus, we're gathering around another thing. And so to try to articulate that to the church, so I've said to them, like, expect to be annoyed with each other, expect to be dumbfounded by somebody's point of view, but then hopefully, if the two of us can say, but I'm trying to follow Jesus, that would be the binding tie.
Yeah.
And I think that expectation, I mean, I do a similar thing with people who are getting married. I tell them, look, there's this whole cultural thing and there's Disney and all this stuff. But if this marriage is like preparing you for eternity with God, and it's meant to put a microscope on the things that like are broken within you so that you can start moving forward in holiness. And if it's meant to teach you about the love of God, which is going to break down barriers, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have, uncomfortable time in your home. Like, of course, that's what it's built for. If it was built to make you totally satisfied, then it'd be very frustrating when that happened. So like setting that, I feel like the expectation matters. Anyway.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. I was just thinking about how, like, almost like giving people permission to expect that they're going to live with conflict with people. Mm-hmm. And I think this vision of like, this is what the early church had to do. And it's almost like an excitement of like, oh, we get to practice the same way that these early Christians were learning to practice, right? Like we went through Romans, and a lot of it is Paul like laying out, hey, you both have two totally different visions of what it means to exist in the world as faithful to God. And Jesus, the only the only thing that brings you together is Jesus. Is this centering your life on Jesus. And so I think like going through Romans, and so having those points that we've walked through this together as a community. So now we have hooks to hang things on, like, oh, remember when we talked about that? Like, expect that there's going to be tension, to your point. We want to be moving towards the well that is Jesus, right? We want to be a center set community, to use Alan Hirsch's language. Like, and that means you're going to look to your right and to your left, and you may not have a lot of agreements on like how like flourishing is achieved, except that we're all learning to follow Jesus together.
Yeah.
And I think, again, naming that and giving permission for that to be true so that no one's surprised by it.
Absolutely. And I think just if I'm honest, like what I'm afraid of, and this is where like my faith, like where I struggle in my faith, is that following Jesus and the work of the Spirit is actually going to do more than what I would like to do, you know?
Or that
like,
you can control.
Yeah. I mean, I'm that's my worry, is like, if I don't spell out to them, you know, this is what you need to line up with and how you need to live and who you need to serve and how you need to do it, that the work of Jesus and the Spirit won't get them there. And I've had a friend of mine in Tucson who's pushed back on me on that and said, that's the Spirit's work. Not that we don't care about that. That's what we pray for. And that's what we point them to. And then but that is the work you cannot accomplish. And that's hard for me, frankly. And and I think admitting that is good. And I have a feeling that churches that do admit that that's hard and everything are not going to be the biggest, because I think people want people who know what to do and say, follow me, I know what to do, let's go. Like, there's something really appealing about that. But I am dishonest when I do that. You're right. Because the truth is, I want to follow Jesus. I don't always know how. I might be wrong sometimes. But if we can all get on board with that and say that, we're going to have to trust the Spirit together.
Yeah. It's also leaves, how should I say, we are changing.
Right.
Like the pastors are changing too. I mean, I am finding that there are deep parts of me when I think about my engagement with the body politic and all this stuff that I've inherited, the stuff in my family structure that I take for granted, that I'm still experiencing, you know, a reframing of my mind and heart around how I think, you know, government should work and civic life should work, all that kind of stuff. And what I'm hearing both of you say is, not only is this leaving space for our congregation to grow into Christ-likeness and leaving space for the Spirit to bring about the conviction as to how they're going to vote or how they're going to treat an issue, it also is leaving us space. Because if we like, how old am I? I'm a very young person. I'm a young person, but I think I'm 43. So I'm 43. So my 43-year-old self has very different views on how Jesus shapes me as it relates to a certain issue than I did when I was 33. I would imagine that when I'm 53 and 63, I'll look back and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did. So if we get up in front of the pulpit and say, this is the way, according to me, that we should vote, or this is the Christian perspective, Andy, I appreciate what you're saying. Like, that's dishonest, because it's like, well, this is my perspective and my current state of being.
Yeah.
Not the Christian perspective. So it even gives room for us to grow into different convictions.
There was a study done recently, and I wish I knew where it came from, but it was basically they interviewed people over every 10 years over a span of something like 50 to 60 years. And the question in the study was, do people change their mind on things, or are they pretty settled? So they would ask, you know, somebody in their 30s a question, and they would say, do you think you're settled on this issue? Have you made up their mind? And they said that typically people would feel like, yes, they had settled. And then 10 years later, most of those people had changed their mind. at least to some degree, and said, yeah, I was not quite right 10 years ago. And they would say, do you feel like you've arrived and settled now? And they would say, yes. And then, and then 10 years later, and basically the conclusion of the study is we always think that we've decided and we're right. And we're almost always wrong about that. Yeah.
These people with weak convictions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess is the point, right? Of like, I want to learn how to be right. What's that quote? Like the person that has, like we're all beggars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone
one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread.
Yeah. And the humility that comes along with that.
Yeah.
And I think in this day and age, we have to trust that the way of Jesus, that where glory looks like humility and sacrifice, will be a compelling draw for people to want to know more about Jesus, and will help us learn how to live in the world with a perseverance that comes from the Spirit, because pride and hubris that just we watch that happen over and over and over in the world, and yet we are so quick to attach ourselves to that.
Yeah.
Even though we watch it fail time and time and time again. And the way of Jesus is the way of humility, the way of the cross, the way of learning to rethink things. And so if I'm asking our congregation to rethink things, then I have to be willing to be humble enough to rethink things myself, and to say out loud, hey, I thought this and I was wrong about that.
Yeah. And I think that, isn't that what we want the other political party to do, right? Generally. And so, but it's so hard to exhibit it. And then, I was hearing even while you were speaking, while I was speaking, I was imagining somebody going, but isn't there a time to call something evil, evil? And I don't disagree with that. I don't, but maybe it feels like that's a tool you bring out sparingly. And and what I mean by that is that if you're always out there just boom, boom, this is it, that's the answer, that feels very bold, that feels very strong. But if we're honestly going to change our minds on things, that's going to diminish that witness of ours when you look back on it. But I think if you're more careful and saying, look, we got to follow Jesus, you need to discern what that means. And then every once in a while you bring out that tool and say, hey, I can't cross this line. And our community can't cross it. I think people are going to take it more seriously in those moments. Anyway, I don't want to discredit that. There's humility. There is a place for conviction. There is.
Yeah. I'm curious for you guys, what does it look like to build trust so you can say those things in your congregations?
Jackie, that's big. And I think I've not, always, I think in the past I could look back and say some of our failures had to do with that. And I would say I thought that we had trust because everybody assumed that everybody, I would say as a leader, I think I assumed I had that trust just because people said, Andy's a decent guy. And this church generally is, above board. But what I think I missed, what people would have meant by trust, was that you know me, you understand where I'm coming from, my fears, that deeper level that is hard to get to with a body of people. And a leader, I don't think honestly can achieve it. A leader, I think a community has to like share that burden. But I think when we experienced fracturing, usually I heard convictions, but underneath it I heard, oh cool, the screen's doing the thumbs up. I heard conviction, but underneath it I actually ended up hearing fear and a sense of not being understood, of feeling alone, like nobody understands where I'm coming from. I mean, I'm thinking of a law enforcement officer. Like the report was nobody understood my experience, right? So there was a presentation of strong conviction, but under it was this sense like I'm alone here.
Yeah.
Nobody gets me. And I think that I thought I had built trust, or our community had built trust, but we hadn't built that layer yet. And so I hope we're better and moving in a better direction. How, Caleb, Jackie, yeah, how about you?
I asked the question. So.
Oh,
Dang it.
I'm learning.
Yeah, I similar to Andy, a lot of my biggest failures prophetically have been that I thought that I had more relational capital than I did, that I had actually cashed in already and was drawing on a deficit. And I mean, I've been at Desert Springs since 2001, on staff since 6. And I think Andy mentioned this earlier that, you know, there's a certain amount of prophetic muscle that your congregation can flex with, but at some point in time, it just maybe collapses in on itself, like putting too much weight on the bench press of the gym. You know, it's just too much. And we want to develop that muscle. We want to call things out. I think, how do you build trust? For me, it's if I can't look a person in the eye, know their name, and know something about them, then it's likely that if I give a prophetic word, it's going to hit with, you don't know me, exactly what Andy's saying. So I think, I mean, Young Life has this statement, like, you don't put the best speakers on the stage. You put the people on the stage that everybody knows the best, because, you know, these 17-year-old kids don't care how polished your presentation is if you don't know them. And I think that applies to all pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
What do you think?
To be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just learning, and I'm learning from you guys. Just wondering.
I bet you know a thing or two, though.
Well, I'm learning, like, because I do think it's important for us, especially in this moment, to be a prophetic voice, to have a prophetic imagination, and then to speak that out loud. But I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to build that trust and build that foundation of trust, so that when it's said, people hear it. They have ears to hear, and don't just immediately discount it.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning how to do that.
The other piece that I might add, and this is, I don't know anything about this yet, I should say, but is I think we don't give stuff enough time. And I think we want the prophetic voice to work fast. And so I've been thinking about, so you could flash back to 2016, 2020. There might have been somebody who heard me say something and said, I don't like that. And they left our church. And in my mind, it didn't work, you know, for whatever. But I don't know that.
Right.
I don't know if it did or didn't. Like, maybe they're in a process where they were offended and scared and whatever, but they are still marinating. God's still at work. So I think about some of the things I've changed my mind on. Very rarely have I changed my mind in like a week.
Yeah.
When I've been deeply convicted about something, it's usually taken, honestly, years of hearing another thing, going to God and saying, is that right? I don't like that. Hearing it again, stumbling on something in scripture, I go, oh, and then starting to think, I think I might need to go back to somebody, and that takes time. And so I don't know. When did we decide that the prophetic voice just, created immediate change? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, that's not the biblical story.
Right.
Again, I don't know why we thought that would happen, because that's not what happened. That's not what we see throughout Scripture.
Often, takes generations, right?
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
And I think too, one must discern if their calling is to be prophetic or pastoral. I think the pastoral role has elements of the apostolic, the prophetic, the evangelistic, the teacher. But one thing to notice about prophetic ministry is rarely are they with the people in a shepherding way. They're usually yelling and being run out of town. And that may be instructive too. If you feel like you're being run out of town, maybe God's calling you to be a prophet.
Yeah.
But how one balances those various callings, I think, Alan Hirsch, Jackie, you mentioned, I think is wise to draw our attention back to the book of Ephesians, that there are some called to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, teachers, shepherds. And we're expecting one person to do all 5 roles in the local congregation. And it may be that there's someone else in the congregation who has that prophetic voice, but it doesn't need to be a pulpit. It can be small groups. It can be book studies. It can be increasing our imagination of how we can do the prophetic, I think, can help us too, and give some space, Andy, as you're saying, for people to change. But we could go on for hours, and I would love to, but I want to honor your time. Where can people find you and your work?
You can find us at southscottsdalepres.org, or the ministry that we do with our friends experiencing homelessness under South Scottsdale is called Community House. And you can find that at communityhouseaz.org.
And Andy, from your bunker, where can we find you?
When I'm not in my bunker, you can find me at Mission Church Tucson, which is TUCSON.com. I do some other things. There's a missional idea cohort I'm part of, Infuse. You can look that up. The Instagram where I put ministry stuff is A Little Mission. Andy Littleton, A Little Mission.
Okay. I see what you did. Appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, thank you both, Andy and Jackie.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the J29 Coalition Podcast. For more information, visit j29coalition.com.